Our last speaker tonight is Professor Todd Surovell, who's an archaeologist in the Department of Anthropology. And I'd like to start by observing that the importance and cultural character of Wyoming's indigenous Native American population is, of course, readily apparent to anyone who spends time here. But the prominence of the state's present Native population obscures often this region's earliest humans, those who migrated here into this continent across the Siberian land bridge some 13,000 years ago, and then their earliest descendants who arrived in Wyoming just a short time later. Our next speaker, Professor Todd Surovell, has become one of the nation's experts on these earliest inhabitants, what archaeologists call Paleo-Indians. Dr. Surovell has been excavating at the Prele Mammoth site over near Douglas since 2014, a site where America's earliest humans hunted and brought down large mammoths to feed themselves. The animal and human remains there are already revealing important features of how ancient peoples lived and interacted with their environment to sustain themselves. Of course, stone and bone relics do not speak. They do not tell you what they are or how they were used. They must be interpreted by archaeologists. Given that we live in a modern world with plastics, iPhones, and processed food, this task can sometimes be rather difficult. To assist in understanding ancient artifacts, archaeologists sometimes study native peoples who practice lifestyles similar to ancient ways. Todd has been living with and learning from the Duka reindeer herders of northern Mongolia for several years now, across all the year's seasons, to understand how they acquire life's necessities and survive the weather extremities they are exposed to. When Todd is not traveling or excavating, he teaches in UW's Anthropology department, where we have now pulled him over into the dark side and made him a department chair. His teaching responsibilities on a general basis range from introductory archaeological courses to directing doctoral dissertations. And tonight he's going to speak to us about Wyoming's first humans at an Ice Age mammoth kill site. Professor Surovell.
Thanks for the nice introduction, Paul, and thanks to you all for being here at this late hour. I really enjoyed listening to my colleagues, Christy and Rob, talking about issues affecting Wyoming today. We're going to change gears here and talk about issues affecting Wyoming at the end of the last ice age, 13,000 years ago. This project, the Prele Mammoth site, is a project I'm really excited about. This kind of site is extremely rare. I've been looking for one to work on for over 20 years, and starting in 2014, I had the opportunity to do so. So I want to tell you the story of this site, how we came to find it, how we came to work on it, and some of the things that we've learned. And this is very much research that's in progress. This shows the site here. This site was actually discovered, like many important archaeological sites in North America, by locals. A doctor from Douglas, Wyoming named William Heinrichs and his buddy Mike Ernst were out northwest of Douglas looking for arrowheads and checking out some teepee rings near Fort Fetterman when they found mammoth bones sticking out of this bank. This is a creek called the Prele Creek. That was 1986. They notified through a mutual friend, George Frizen, who was the state archaeologist and a faculty member at the University of Wyoming, also the University of Wyoming's only member of the National Academy of Sciences. We proudly call him a member of our department. They notified George, who came out like he often did. Whenever he had time, he'd jump in the pickup truck, take a small crew, and go do some digging. And over spring break in 1987, in April, they tested this site. This shows the location of this site. So this is the North Platte here. Douglas is right in here. So just northwest of Douglas, where the North Platte wraps around the Laramie Range there. And Prele Creek is a south to north flowing tributary of the North Platte that you cross on the interstate there. And it's about a mile from where Prele Creek hits the North Platte. This is what the site looks like today. These are our excavations in July of this year. You can see that the site's fairly deeply buried. This is Prele Creek here in the background. This is an old bridge from the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. This site's buried in an alluvial terrace, which means sediments that were deposited by La Prele Creek. At the base, these sediments are about 20,000 years old, and at the top, about 7,000 years old, and this mammoth is buried about 10 feet beneath the modern ground surface, about halfway up through this terrace. So it's a complicated site to dig because of the depth. This is where we're screening sediments here, and these were our active excavations. This is what the excavation looked like in 1987. You can tell by the roughly 1985 Toyota Corolla hatchback here. It looked very much like it does today, and here's their excavation block, and you can get a sense of the depth. In that excavation block, they found the remains of a young Columbian mammoth. This is not a woolly mammoth, but a species of mammoth that lived further south in North America called the Columbian mammoth. You can see articulated ribs here in most of the spine. Most of the bones were from the axial skeleton, which means from the center of the body. We didn't recover any of the limb bones, although they had one scapula and a couple of toe bones. The head of the animal would have been down here. This is the atlas vertebrae just beneath the skull, and the spine is running in this direction. In addition to the mammoth bones, George and his crew found 8 artifacts. 1 flake tool, so this is a big chip that's been removed off of a piece of stone and then modified to make a tool, and then 7 tiny flakes. George was pretty excited about this. At the time, it suggested that what we had here was an extinct Ice Age elephant that humans had interacted with and likely killed. This animal butchered it, consumed it, etc. This was the tool that he found. This stone, this type of chert, it's brown translucent chert, probably an oolitic chert. It has these small round inclusions in it that you probably can't see. But a very distinctive kind of raw material. This is probably a butchery tool, and it was found right in the middle of these bones here. This site's on private land, and there was a dispute with the landowner, and that shut down the excavations. So after digging this small block, which is 4 meters or about 12 feet by 3 meters or about 10 feet, in 1987, and finding these really promising finds, the excavation ended, and the site sat there for 27 years. To give you some context about what these kinds of sites represent, we've been finding sites like this in North America for a really long time. The first evidence we had for human exploitation of mammoth came from northern Colorado in Weld County, at a site called the Dent site. This was actually excavated by a Catholic priest named Father Bildry, who was a faculty member at St. Regis College in Denver, where they found the remains of mammoths associated with large spear points. This was a really important find. This, coupled with something called the Folsom site in New Mexico, for the first time indicated the presence of humans in the New World during the Ice Age. Shortly thereafter, at a site in northeastern New Mexico, or eastern New Mexico, a site called Blackwater Draw, also known as Clovis. The same thing was found, more mammoths associated with these big spear points. Very distinctive spear points with large flakes removed off from the base to give it this channeled appearance. We call these fluted points or Clovis points, the name coming from the nearby town of Clovis, which is near this gravel quarry where these were found. That was from 1932 to 1936, we started getting these hints of elephant hunting in North America. By 1966, this is a paper written in Scientific American by Vance Haynes 30 years later. He says, elephant hunting today is a specialized activity confined to a handful of professionals in parts of Africa and Asia. 11,000 or so years ago, it provided a living for one of the earliest groups of humans to inhabit the New World. Since 1932, however, the excavation of no fewer than 6 stratified ancient sites of mammoth hunting activity in the western U.S. and the discovery of scores of significant, if less firmly documented sites elsewhere in North America have proved its validity beyond the possibility of challenge. By 1966, this was a thing, these mammoth kill sites. We had 6 of them. The story nowadays isn't much different. These are rare sites. Here are sites from North America showing reliable associations with proboscideans. Proboscideans being the mammalian order that includes mammoths, mastodons, elephants, and the other type of proboscidean we had in the New World? Anybody know? Mammoths, mastodons, and gomphotheres? Anybody ever hear of a gomphothere? We didn't have gomphotheres in Wyoming, but we had them in Mexico, Latin America, South America as well. Mammoth here, mastodon here, gomphothere here. Most of these sites that you see here are associations with mammoth, woolly mammoth in Wisconsin. Most of these are Columbian mammoth in the Great Plains. This is a relatively newly discovered site in Sonora, Mexico, called El Fin del Mundo, which is a Clovis gomphothere kill site. All of these sites we have artifacts associated with the remains of proboscideans. And in Wyoming, we're blessed to have more than one of these. In 1973, George Friesen excavated the Colby site just north of Worland, Wyoming, where he found the remains of 7 mammoths, 3 Clovis points, and a handful of other artifacts, and noted that two of these animals at least, the bones had been piled in unusual configurations, and he argued that these were frozen meat caches. One of the Clovis points here from the Colby site. Of course, there's more to the story than simply people hunting mammoths. There's this incredible pattern that we see in the New World, and in fact we see this worldwide, that the arrival of humans to many parts of the world, and certainly that's true in Wyoming, and all of North America, and all of South America, the arrival of humans corresponds with the extinction of these large animals. So here you're seeing a very famous stratigraphic section from southeastern Arizona in the San Pedro Valley. This is a molar of a mammoth. This is a very famous stratigraphic unit called the Black Mat. The transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, or the Ice Age, to the modern climatic era is right at the base of that black mat. So this is one of the last mammoths. Beneath this stratigraphic marker across the New World, if we're going to speak generally with a broad brush, we find lots of evidence of Pleistocene megafauna, meaning big animals, and a lack of humans, no evidence for humans. Right around that contact, we find these things associated, and then after that contact, we have artifacts and no more of these Pleistocene megafauna. This temporal coincidence may be a coincidence. This was an interesting time in the New World when climate was changing dramatically. All kinds of things were happening. Glaciers were melting, sea level was rising, ecosystems were reorganizing, and humans appeared on the scene. So determining the cause of this extinction event remains a really contentious topic, but many people think that humans probably had something to do with this extinction event. And every site that we find that shows evidence of human exploitation of these animals contributes to our understanding of that question. And of course, it wasn't just mammoths we had in the New World. We lost approximately 33 genera of megafauna, genera being the plural of genus. Each genus, many of these genera had more than one species, so we're talking about 40-some species of large animals go extinct in the New World around 12,800 years ago, including the proboscideans, but also things like lions, which we had in Wyoming. If we're going to talk about carnivores, we had dire wolves, cheetah-like cats, saber-toothed cats, other saber-toothed cats here, other herbivores. We had camels, we had multiple species of horses, giant short-faced bears, giant armadillos called glyptodonts, almost the size of the Volkswagen Beetle. Parts of North America, we had giant beavers the size of black bears, giant ground sloths. All of these animals lived around here not very long ago. If you were here 14,000 years ago, you could have seen these animals. By 12,700 BP, they're all gone. So this is the context for these kinds of sites. They tell us about first human arrival to the New World, first human arrival to Wyoming, potential ecological impacts of these early humans who were hunter-gatherers living off of wild plant and animal resources. So when I arrived in Wyoming in 2003 for the first time as a faculty member, I was really excited to get back into this site. I knew it was there, but there was this long-standing dispute with the landowner. It wasn't until 2014 that we were able to go back. And we went back with the University of Wyoming Archaeological Field School. So these are undergraduates getting their first experience excavating an archaeological site. They have no idea how lucky they are to be digging a site this rare. We did the obvious thing. We found George's old excavation and we opened up a series of test units around it. By the way, this bank had eroded back about 4.5 to 5 feet between 1987 and 2014, so we lost some more of this site in that gap. Mammoth kill sites are interesting. Obviously, it's a big operation to kill a mammoth and to butcher it, but generally you don't find much in them. Butchering a mammoth requires some sharp tools, and you'll find some of those. It requires some weapons, and sometimes you'll find some of those if you're lucky. And then you'll find little tiny flakes from resharpening those tools. So we dug very carefully and very slowly, and we screened all the sediments with water through essentially window screen 16th-inch mesh to maximize our recovery. In 2014, I went back with all this excitement, hoping to find mammoth skulls and tusks and giant mammoth bones. And it turns out we actually found relatively little. Thankfully, that's not the end of the story. This shows George's excavation from 2014. This shows what or from 1987. This is what we added in 2014. You see, we didn't add much to that bone bed. George Friesen is really good at finding the good stuff. So what did we find? Well, we did get 2 fairly large pieces of mammoth bone, a piece of a rib and a toe, and then hundreds of small bits of weathered bone where this animal sat out on the surface for a while before it was buried that kind of form a halo around that bone bed. 3 small pieces of red ochre. This is a naturally occurring pigment. It's hematite. It's an iron oxide mineral that was probably used as a paint. 5 tiny pieces of chipped stone, 5 flakes. Here's the mammoth bone in place. This is one of the ribs we found. This is 10 centimeters or about 4 inches. Here's the toe bone here, and you can see that's a big toe. Here are the artifacts we found. Don't get too excited. Let me show you something you'll recognize, give you an intuitive scale here. These are not big by any means. These are little resharpening flakes from sharpening the edges of tools. If that was all we found, we probably would have stopped. But we had something incredibly lucky happen. So this is our excavation here. This is where we're doing the screening. Students have to carry heavy buckets of dirt along the face of this terrace and down this pathway where we water screen. And this little path we cut into the face of the terrace was really narrow in one place. We were worried about the safety of our students, so we're cutting back into the face of that terrace. And when we did, right here, we found something. Sticking out of the bank was this big cobble. When you see a big clast, a big piece of stone floating in very fine-grained sediments, you should be suspicious. These are sediments that were deposited in a flood about 13,000 years ago. Floodwaters tend to be carrying silts and clays and very fine sediments, not big rocks. So how does a big rock end up in there? Well, it's very likely that humans brought that in. And if you see this edge, which looks very jagged, that's because it has been flaked. It was in the same position as the mammoth stratigraphically, and it was 12 meters south of the mammoth, or about 38 feet, pretty far away. When we took it out, this is what it looked like. It's a big cobble with 3 flakes removed off of one edge to make a very sharp edge. What this is, what we call this, the technical term in archaeology, we call this a chopper. It's a heavy-duty butchery tool. We sent it to California to have it tested for blood residue analysis, and it tested positive for elephant protein residue. This is a big tool for taking apart a big animal, which is pretty cool. When we got that result, we took the tool that George found in 1987 and tested it. It also tested positive for elephant protein residue. These are tools that were used to butcher that animal. The significance of this find, we didn't really realize at first. I mean, the most important thing we recognized when we found it was that the site got a lot bigger. Here's what the site looked like before we had that, and here's what it looked like afterward. So we knew we had this mammoth up here. We knew that a chopper was discarded over here, but that's all we knew. What was it doing so far away? So we came back in 2015 and 2016, did some more excavations, expanded around the mammoth some more, but we went back to where this chopper was found to see, was this an isolated artifact that somebody tossed away as they were, walking away, or did this indicate the presence of some secondary work area at some distance from the mammoth? So we opened up the area that became known as the chopper block. And these are our excavations from that area. What we found was quite a surprise. A big stain of red ochre, where the ground was stained red, 2 meters, 6 feet long by 1.5 meters wide, maybe 6 feet by 4 feet, where the ground is stained red with pigments that people brought into this site. A hearth feature or a fire pit. Hundreds of flakes from making and resharpening tools. A large number of tools. Bison bone, some of that had been burned. Several bone needles. A bone bead. Not the kind of stuff you expect to find at a mammoth kill site. Show you what this ochre stain looked like. This is not the best light to see it, but I'm going to enhance it in a second. So these nails that you see in this photo are 1 meter apart, or about 3 feet apart. These nails here. This area here is stained red with this pigment people brought into the site. I'm going to enhance it here. Can you see it now? This is iron oxide pigment that was transported into this site. So much of it that the ground was stained red. We know where it came from too. We think we do because we've tested it chemically. We think it came from the historic Sunrise Iron Mine near Hartville, Wyoming, in the Hartville Uplift. What are they doing with all this ochre? I don't know, is the simple answer. Often we associate ochre with ritual use. It may have a utilitarian use, we don't know. One thing we thought we might encounter is a human burial. Ochre is very commonly encountered with burials. We know that's not the case here. All I know is that a large area of this site became stained red with this pigment. In addition to this stained area, we mapped thousands of little nodules of this stuff all around this area. Here are some of the tools from that area. Beautiful tools, butchery tools, a variety of tool forms. This is probably some kind of knife. This is too. Most of these materials come from the Hartville Uplift, that same area where that pigment came from. This is the tool that came from the mammoth itself that George found. We call this a spoke shave, where this notch was intentionally made in the tool. This is an end scraper. We think this is a hide scraping tool. It has been burnt. Bison bone, several pieces of ribs and long bone fragments that were processed for marrow. When you're sitting on thousands of pounds of mammoth meat, why are you eating bison? I don't know. This is a young bison. We weren't sure what animal it was. Most of these pieces are not identifiable because they're rib midsections, not identifiable to species, but we had them tested using ancient DNA methods, and they're identified as bison. Needles. We wouldn't have recovered these if we weren't screening with a 16th-inch mesh. These are all broken. Most of them were probably broken by our excavation methods. This one has a piece of the eye preserved. It's snapped across the eye here. They're sort of flat in cross-section on the eye end, and then very round in cross-section down near the tip. These are very, very fine. What are they sewing? I guarantee you they are not sewing mammoth hide. I should note these are the oldest, as far as I know, the oldest bone needles found in North America, in the New World, south of Alaska. I think there's one older from Alaska. This is the oldest bone bead, the oldest ornament from North America, and we have it right here in Wyoming. So all this stuff is looking very domestic, right? It's very different from what we find in the area where the mammoth was. It's a very small bead, a small tubular bone. You can see how well-rounded the ends are. These grooves in it are not natural. Those are cultural. I'm not sure what those are about. These may have been in the place where they intended to snap the bone when they were making the bead, but it snapped further down. I'm not sure. Most recently, in 2017, we went back. We had done some testing in the previous years to try to find the edges of this site, and we knew that an area west of the Mammoth also had artifacts. We decided to open up that area last year. This is our field school crew from last year. This is my colleague Bob Kelly. My student Spencer Pelton, my other student, PhD student Madeline Mackey is back here. The rest are field school students. Oh, this is Carolyn Buff, a volunteer from Casper. That's me. Here's what the site looks like now. This is the area we dug last year. We call it the Northwest Block. So we're west of the Mammoth here, about the same distance from the Mammoth as the Ochrestein, but west of the Mammoth. And I want to talk briefly about what we found there. And then I want to talk about what we found down here, south of the Mammoth. Again, we're trying to just find the edge of this site. In 2014, the site was tiny, right? It was just this. Now it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger the more we dig. So here are excavations from 2017. What you see here is a map just showing counts of chip stone. The bigger the circle, the more pieces of chip stone we found, about 50 in here. You can see this nice circular distribution of chip stone. Right in the center of it, another hearth. This is what we call a hearth-centered activity area, or a fancy way of saying a fire pit with some stuff around it. In addition to all this chip stone, more bison bone. This is a vertebrae, a lumbar vertebra of a young bison. It may be the same bison that we found in that chopper area. Different body parts than we found in the chopper area. And also different types of stone. These, given the light, you can't really tell very well, and even if we had good light, you might not be able to tell. But in the chopper area, we have stone that is yellow to brown to clear with a lot of black speckles, cherts, and quartzites, and we know where those come from, as I mentioned, from the Hartville area. In this Northwest Block, we have this translucent brown chert that came from a different part of Wyoming, in fact, not too far from here. This stuff comes from the Green River Formation. We're fairly sure. The most common outcrops are in southern and northern Sweetwater County. Either this stuff is coming from, say, east of Farson, northeast of Farson, or possibly down by Wamsutter. But what's interesting is here we have these two hearths in different parts of the site showing different lithic raw materials, which suggests that we have people from different parts of the state aggregating, congregating at this mammoth to cooperate in the butchery of this animal. If this stuff came from northern Sweetwater County, they're following the old Paleo-Oregon Trail, right? Down the Sweetwater to the Platte. These folks are coming up the Platte. These folks are coming down the Platte. If it came from down in this part of the county, it's probably the same thing. They just may have taken this route up the Platte, not so much the Oregon Trail, but I like the Oregon Trail story. Down here, we were just trying to find the southern edge of the site. In this chopper block, we were chasing artifact densities, relatively high densities. We're moving to the south, and it suggested to us there was something else down there. So we thought, let's put in some test units to the south and see what shows up. In order to put in a test unit, which just means we dig a 1 by 1 meter square hole, and just to see what's there, we dig it fairly quickly. At this site, because the stratigraphic layer of interest is 10 feet deep, we take the top off with a backhoe. We take off about 8 feet of dirt with a backhoe and start digging. And because our backhoe trench was pretty narrow, we could only put in half of a test unit here, here, and here. And we're just blindly digging to see what we're going to find, and we found something pretty amazing down there. 60 feet south of the Mammoth, we found the thing I've been looking for 20 years. This is a Clovis point. This is the kind of spear point that was made by the first people in the New World 13,000 years ago. Really, really rare things. These are what were used to kill mammoths. It's an absolutely beautiful artifact. You can see it has this flake that's derived from the tip. This is an old impact fracture where this thing was used and it broke off and they resharpened it. The very base of this is missing here. You can see the flute. Both sides are fluted. So this confirms that we're dealing here with a Clovis site, the same kind of spear points that we see in New Mexico, at Blackwater Draw, and at Dent in Colorado. And in fact, you find projectile points like this in this time period across North America and into Mesoamerica, suggesting again these are the first people in the New World. So this is 60 feet south of the Mammoth. We found this. Here's the Mammoth. Here's the Clovis point. We just got super lucky to happen to put in a test unit right there and find a Clovis point. And I think 2 flakes also came out of that unit. But it suggests there's more stuff down here. In fact, we got flakes out of these units, out of this unit. There's flakes out of these 2 units. The site keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Notice we haven't even tested to the north yet. So to try to put all this stuff together into some kind of story for you, this is what these sites normally look like. This is what Clovis mammoth kills look like. Nothing more than this, in fact. We have one animal, or sometimes multiple animals, associated with a spear point, a couple of tools, and some flakes, and that's it. What we found there is pretty typical of a Clovis mammoth kill site. If we just had this part of the site, what we'd say is, well, this is a mammoth kill. Or possibly a scavenged mammoth. The idea that this animal died naturally and then people exploited it. Telling the difference between the 2 of those things is complicated. We usually do it by the presence or absence of weaponry, which is not particularly telling because weaponry can be retrieved. And half of this animal is gone, right? This is an erosional edge, so anything to the east is long gone. Erosion took out that part of the site, who knows when. So there could have been weapons in here that were since gone. The weapon we found is 60 feet away, but this is typical, a typical assemblage for this kind of site. People killed a mammoth and butchered it. If we only had this part of the site, we'd tell a very different story. This is absolutely typical of a campsite. This is domestic stuff, right? We have cooking of bison bone. We have sewing. We have hide working. We have butchery tools. We have this big stain of red ochre. They were painting something. What were they painting? I don't know. Something or someone or both. But if we only had this part of the site, there's no doubt what we would call this. We'd call this a Clovis campsite. But of course we have both. The northwest block shows the same kind of pattern that we see here. A hearth with butchered bison bone and burned bone and stone tools surrounding it. Again, a very domestic campsite kind of pattern. What this looks like to us, our best interpretation at the moment, and it seems like our ideas about this site change every year as we find more and more things, is that if we make an ethnographic analogy to foragers from Central Africa that have been observed ethnographically, elephant hunters, these are Mbuti foragers in the Democratic Republic of Congo who hunted elephants up until the 1980s, possibly the 1990s. When you kill an animal of this size, normally when hunter-gatherers go out and kill an animal, they butcher it and then they bring the choice parts back to their camp. When you kill an elephant of this size, it doesn't make any sense to try to transport an elephant back to your camp. What you do instead is you transport your camp to the elephant. So these Central African foragers, when they kill an elephant, they set up a temporary camp around this animal to butcher it, to smoke the meat, to preserve it. They'll stay there for a week, and then they'll move on. And that's probably exactly what we're seeing at this site. So putting it together, I think what we're looking at here, 12,950 years ago, some people killed a young mammoth. When I say, actually, we don't know the age of the mammoth. We say it's juvenile because not all the bones have fused yet. This animal was still growing, but mammoths grew well into their 30s. We have, I should tell you this too, we have in our comparative faunal collection, we have a collection of bones of animals from around the world that we use to compare archaeological specimens to. We have an Indian elephant, an adult Indian elephant in that collection, and this mammoth, juvenile mammoth, is much larger than that Indian elephant. It was probably an animal that weighed, a big Columbian adult bull mammoth could weigh up to 10 tons, 20,000 pounds. We're talking about a 15,000 pound animal, probably, that they killed, which is why you don't want to carry it around after you kill it. So we have a kill site, and then people moved into that camp. They didn't stay there for very long. We can tell that by looking at the amounts of artifacts that we have in the site, the kinds of artifacts. But what's interesting is it looks like multiple groups of people from different parts of the state aggregated to butcher this animal. And I should note, in these other test units that we have around this other parts of the site, we have the potential to look at perhaps more of these heart-centered activity areas that suggest we may be able to figure out exactly how many people we're talking about, keeping in mind, of course, that half the site has now been eroded out by Prele Creek. While they were there, they killed a young bison. They may have shared that animal. Telling whether it's the same animal may be difficult. But so far, for these two heart-centered activity areas we've excavated, we have different body parts, which suggests we may be having the same animal being shared among multiple households. And our working hypothesis at the moment is that this ochre stain marks the location of a domestic space and is probably an indoor space. There was probably a structure there. And the edges of this stain mark the edges of that floor. It's really difficult to detect the presence of architecture for mobile hunter-gatherers who don't build houses out of stone. And this site not only provides us the opportunity to look at mammoth hunting and in butchery, but also gives us the unique opportunity to look at social aspects of human life in Ice Age Wyoming. The first people in Wyoming certainly were preying upon these large animals, but now we can start to maybe see the scale of their social networks, which seem to be stretching across most of the state. That's all I have, so I'll be happy to entertain any questions. Yes, sir?
The first question I have is, did the land change hands, or
it did.
What allowed you guys to get into the site?
The land changed hands. George Frizen, who's still in the department, 92 years old, went out to Douglas, found the new landowner, talked to him, and got us permission to go back in.
That's correct. And then also, how long was the point?
About 3 inches. Other questions? Dave.
I'm curious about the Bridger Church, or the Eocene church that you found.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a photograph, but it strikes me as, I'm going to assume you're positive that it's, Eocene church. It kind of looked like some of the Cretaceous church that we find in the northern winds, both on the east side and the west side. So one of these days when I find myself in Laramie, we can chat. But that would not...
How confident? So I'll tell you, I'm not confident at all that it's necessarily Green River. The reason why we started looking in this direction is that we have a flake from that area. We also have a flake of oolitic chert, which definitely comes out of that formation, right? When we first found that chert, we thought we were looking at Knife River flint from North Dakota. But now we're pretty sure it's coming from this part of the state. It could be Cretaceous. But Morrison is another possibility.
And the Clovis point is of what material type would you say?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is a beautiful, pure red chert that in Wyoming, when we find this, we very commonly say this is Phosphoria formation or goose egg formation. Phosphoria, the bighorns are famous for Phosphoria. If it's goose egg, there's a big source of goose egg near Casper. There's a bunch of goose egg in the bighorns. But it's a different raw material, for sure.
Gorgeous.
It's absolutely beautiful, yeah. Sam?
I kind of grew up around Wheatland, Wyoming, and there are outcrops of what we call Laramie red
Near Wheatland.
near Wheatland.
Yeah,
Pretty far from Douglas.
yeah, in fact, in this area we're also finding Hartville Church, which makes me think in that direction is probably the right place to look. We wondered if this is a very red variety of Hartville. Somebody pointed me to a material they call Casper Jasper, which is goose egg formation. You know, one thing about trying to determine the geologic source of raw materials from archaeological sites is it's actually relatively difficult to do. These are not economically valuable materials. Geologists have not spent a lot of time trying to characterize them. So we're often using macroscopic properties like color and texture. But we'll eventually track it down. Yes?
How many dates were you able to gather
On this site,
from that site?
we probably have 20 radiocarbon dates now. The best dates put it at around 12,950 years ago, right in the right time period for Clovis. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What depth were these items found?
About 3 meters, 10 feet.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So as the tundra thaws in Alaska, I've been reading about the holes that have been dug and the layers that are revealed. That's kind of exciting. Do you know?
So, are you talking about the...
It doesn't necessarily relate to this, but there's even grass that's 20,000 years old, maybe.
So in permafrost areas in the Arctic are rapidly melting because of climate change, and they're revealing all kinds of things. So all kinds of organic matter, including mammoths that retain flesh. That's how we know woolly mammoths are woolly, right? Because we have the actual mammoth wool from sites in Alaska and Siberia and Yukon.
And so is that the migration of the people?
So the people who came to the New World, I mean, archaeologists debate about this, but I would say 99% of us think they came from Northeast Asia across the Bering Land Bridge. During the last ice age, when you had ice sheets on top of North America that were a mile thick, all that water that was used to build those ice sheets came out of the ocean, so sea levels dropped about 300 feet, exposing a bridge of land connecting Northeast Asia and Alaska. And that's the route by which people would have entered the New World initially. They would have come into Alaska and Yukon, where actually their way south would have been blocked by continental glaciers. One in the east called the Laurentide ice sheet that was centered over Hudson Bay, and another one that came off the Canadian Rockies called the Cordilleran ice sheet. Those didn't melt back to create a corridor for human migration further south until around 14,000 years ago, when we see the first humans appear in this part of the world. Yes?
Is there some kind of similarity among these sites, like landscape-wise or geologically, or?
Mammoth kill sites?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of these are found in stream valleys near water. Why that is, there are probably a few reasons. One, elephants usually go to water sources to die, but most likely that's where we have sediments of this age preserved. So if you want to find sediments, if you want to find sites of this age, you have to have sediments of that age preserved, and that tends to happen in very well watered areas that are less subject to erosion.
Is the dig site still on or is it over?
The question was, is the dig site still going on or is it over? It's a great question. It's still going on, although we're taking a year off this summer because we have to catch up on lab work and we have to find some money to continue this work. But we'll be going back out in 2019 and 2020 because there's a lot more to find here at this site. Yes, sir.
Just like to follow up on the state's question over here. Is it possible that the migration of the human migration, that it was following the mastodons, the mammoths?
So the mammoths and mastodons have been here long before humans were. Were they following animals? I doubt it. They're basically, we're talking about human expansion across the globe, and the major drivers of that are climate change. So there's nobody really in Arctic Siberia around 20,000 years ago when the world is at the height of the last ice age. It's simply too cold and it's probably too dry. As the world starts to warm, those ecosystems become habitable by humans, and humans slowly expand our range as those habitats open up to humans. Now, certainly there are large mammals that give people the incentive to move into those areas, but it's probably climate change that makes it possible for humans to live in those areas and use them year-round. Seasonally, for example, the Arctic can be really, really difficult, particularly in the winter. In terms of mammoths and mastodons in the New World, mammoths have been here for, I want to say, about 2 million years. Mastodons considerably longer. They arrived the same way humans did. They came across the Bering Land Bridge. So those animals were here, and there was certainly an incentive for humans to migrate, but I don't think it was following animals per se.
Can I ask one question?
You can ask a question, Paul.
You've been talking about how you have a large site, and you've been comparing the mammoth kill portion of it to other mammoth kills and the campsite portion of other campsites. What I'd like to know is, when other people have dug mammoth kill sites, have they gone out 60 feet to find out if there are campsites around it? Is this, so what I'm trying to find out, is this unusual, or is this just the first time we've actually ever looked in those places?
It's a great question. A little bit of both. It is unusual. Nobody's ever found anything quite like this, although it's what we've always expected to find. And most of these mammoth kill sites, people dig the mammoth and then they run out of artifacts and stop. That would have happened to us. It almost did happen to us. If we hadn't found that chopper by accident, that would have happened to us. So that's true for most of these sites. Now, there's a couple of exceptions. The Murray Springs site in Arizona, they were digging a mammoth kill area. Right next to it, they had a small bison kill and possibly a horse kill around some springs in the desert in southeastern Arizona. They were parking their trucks about 80 meters away from where they were digging, and one morning they found a Clovis point in one of their tire tracks. And then they realized 80 meters away they had been parking on top of the campsite associated with this kill. And in fact, they found refits between broken projectile points linking these two areas. So they found the tip of a Clovis point, I believe, in the bison kill, and the base in the camp. So that's the best analog we have, and it's 80 meters away, 250 feet away. So that was kind of the model we were thinking about, that would be the norm. Like if we wanted to find the campsite here, it would be really far away and buried, and it would be almost impossible for us to find. Turned out it was right next to it. Shouldn't have surprised us, because if we had looked at these maps of these Central African forager camps, they're very close to the animal as well. But this site, in terms of what we're finding associated with this mammoth, all these domestic things, it is very, very unusual and very, very unique. And it's probably because archaeologists just haven't looked. Yeah, Rob.
Is this the first site like this where you found sharing households, potentially from different places?
So, if we have households, and I think we do, I think these different heart-centered activity areas represent households, and we have sharing, yes, this would be the first clear demonstration of sharing in the Paleo-Indian record, this earliest period of New World prehistory. There are other cases of sharing that are well known from prehistory. But in order to identify that sharing in prehistory, you have to have those households, right? So there aren't a lot of sites where we have this kind of situation. I worked on a site in Colorado that's a little younger. It's a Folsom site. It's only 12,500 years old. 400 years younger, where we have multiple households, but the bone preservation isn't there. But one thing we looked at was whether they were sharing stone. And it looks like they really weren't, that the household chipstone economies were independent. I would guess that if we did have bone, we would find that they were sharing, because we know from studying modern foraging people that especially large game is very often shared. And I should also note in this site, when we look at the lithic raw materials that come from the Mammoth area itself, we have both materials from this northwest block represented in here and from that chopper area that suggests they were cooperating in the butchery of this animal too. So they're probably sharing that mammoth, and they may be sharing that bison as well.
There's a lot of bites in a mammoth.
There's a lot of bites in a mammoth.
How did they kill a mammoth?
Well, I can tell you what it looks like after they killed the mammoth. While they were killing it, I'm not sure. But I mean, when we find mammoths, probably the Naco site in Arizona is the best case. In the Naco site, you have 8 spear points, 8 Clovis points. Where's my Clovis point? There it is. 8 points like this in and around the rib cage of the animal. So you can imagine a number of hunters surrounding this animal, spearing it, probably using throwing spears, not thrusting spears, and probably using an aid to throw those spears called an atlatl, or a spear thrower, which is a long lever that lets you throw the spear harder and faster and gives you greater distance from that animal. So imagine a number of hunters surrounding this animal and spearing it. That's our best guess based on the aftermath.
Okay.
Yes,
One last question.
Have you used multi-spectral imagery, aerial photography, in order to identify any further sites?
We have not.
Marty?
Well, so the question was, have we used multispectral imagery to identify any further sites? Why not money? Certainly money is one of our most limited assets. That's definitely true. These kinds of sites, let's just start with the depth. This is 10 feet beneath the ground surface, right? So if we were to put a satellite in the air or an airplane in the air and do some kind of aerial imagery, it would have to have some impact on the surface vegetation or the surface texture to be able to identify these sites from the sky. And at that depth, they generally don't. And in fact, all of Wyoming's prehistory is hunter-gatherer archaeology. We don't have monuments, right? We don't have significant architecture. So you may have just read about the discovery of these monuments in the Maya lowlands in the jungle using LiDAR. Those are the kinds of things you can identify from the sky. Wyoming's archaeological record, except for the very recent stuff near the surface, is really, really difficult to identify aerially. Let's get one more little guy.
Any pieces of human found in the site?
Any pieces of human? No, there were no pieces of human. What we're looking at here is probably a group of 30 to 50 people, and they probably stayed there a week. So the chances of somebody dying in that spot are pretty low, although they were doing something pretty dangerous there, killing a big animal, right? So it's possible. It's possible, but no, we have found no human remains. One more.
Were there any pieces of weaponry or sharp rocks there?
There was, right here. So far we've got one weapon, very sharp rock, and it's still really sharp.
They might have used that to throw it at the mammoth. They might have used that to kill the mammoth.
Yep, that's the tool you used to kill a mammoth 13,000 years ago. That's exactly right.
Thank you all